Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. A couple of months ago, I started noticing a rather strange trend happening in cover design, especially noticeable in books about the body and health and disability. For years, I've been intrigued and sometimes amused by particular cover trends. Back when I was in grad school, it seemed like the new books about slavery all had dark navy cloth bindings, while books about the history of gender all had dark pink cloth bindings. For the last few years, with no signs of slowing down, it seems like almost every novel with a female protagonist has a cover picture of a woman walking away, photographed from behind. I'm sure you're very familiar with some of these books, and I think there was even a discussion of them on LitHub or some other literary site. I'll try to link to it in the description box if I can find it. I really love an Instagram story that Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine shared, a slideshow of such covers, accompanied by, at least as I remember it, the song Pretty Girls Walk Like This. Recently, I was chatting with Steve Donahue about this trend, and he shared a ton of new releases using exactly the same layout. I had been annoyed by this trend because it denied women faces and the agency that comes with having a face. But he pointed out that instead, it showed that the publishing world was staging, as he said, a war on boobies. Well, But today I want to show you a very different trend. First, I'll show you the books and talk about each one very briefly. Then I want to consider what unites those books and their covers, and perhaps solicit your ideas about why this trend has taken off. So here they are in all their glory. Although most of the books I'm going to mention today have been published in the last year or so, the first one I'll show you came out in March of 2018. Ask Me About My Uterus, A Quest to Make Doctors Believe in Women's Pain, by Abby Norman. After being hospitalized with extreme pain that physicians dismissed as just a urinary tract infection, the author decided to do some investigation herself, heading to the medical library and eventually realizing that she had endometriosis. This book combines her personal story with a larger discussion of the historical, sociocultural, and political context of how the healthcare system has mistreated women's bodies. As she argues, it's time to refute the belief that being a woman is a pre-existing condition. Published in February of 2022, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger, A Life with Chronic Illness, Lessons from a Body in Revolt, by Tessa Miller, recounts the author's diagnosis with sudden and severe Crohn's disease when she was in her 20s. The book's a memoir, but also an analysis of the U.S. healthcare system and how it fails so many people with chronic illness, often because of racial or gender discrimination. Published in the same month as Miller's book is What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma by the radio journalist Stephanie Fu, who investigates both her own experience of post-traumatic stress disorder and the science that is behind both the disorder and the various treatment options. Complex PTSD refers to a response to repeated trauma, something that occurs regularly over the course of years. In Fu's case, her parents abandoned her when she was a teenager after years of not only neglect, but both verbal and physical abuse. In May of 2022, My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, Disability Justice in the Church, by Amy Kenny. I'm just going to quote from the publicity material for the book. Quote, "Much of the church has forgotten that we worship a disabled God whose wounds survived resurrection. It's time for the church to start treating disabled people as full members of the body of Christ, who have much more to offer than a miraculous cure narrative and to learn from their embodied experiences. And then, quote, written by a disabled Christian, this book shows that the church is missing out on prophetic witness and blessing of disability. That line makes me feel quite queasy, but I get her point. Like the other books I've mentioned today, this volume is full of both personal stories and analysis or argumentation, including biblical exegesis. I tend to love that combination of memoir and analysis, but these books have a lot more in common than that. All are about how illness and disability is both experienced by individuals and how illness and disability is seen in the larger world, and how those experiences can become so much harder because of discriminatory responses by others, sometimes based on race and gender, and sometimes based just on disability itself. Also, all four of these books are by young women, and they are each writing from the perspective of a person with the illness or disability being considered in their particular book. On the other hand, there is a fifth book to mention here, one which celebrated its publication date just yesterday, The People's Hospital, Hope and Peril in American Medicine by Ricardo and Nuila. This book, too, is both a personal account and an argument. This time, instead of being written by a woman with illness or disability, this book is written by a male physician, writing not from the perspective of a doctor who's part of the problem, of course, but instead as a person who's working to improve the healthcare system. He follows the stories of 5 people in his community who were desperately in need of care. People who had been turned away by hospitals and doctors because they did not have health insurance, who eventually find their way to, quote, a hospital where insurance comes second to genuine care. The author has worked for more than a decade, and which is often called a safety net hospital. The book is designed both to point out the horrific state of health care for the uninsured or underinsured in the U.S., and also give a model of a more humane system. So let's look at the covers again. First, we have flowers arranged in the shape of reproductive organs. Flowers growing out of an intact rib cage. Flowers surrounding 2 crossed bones. And flowers filling a wheelchair. And then in the last book, flowers twining around a hand reaching for a stethoscope, a much more active posture here. So what's going on? I certainly get that floral covers, especially for commercial fiction aimed primarily at women, have been popular for years. But for health-related memoirs, and these aren't just floral, but are combined with body parts or assistive devices. What do you think? In a way, they remind me of the tradition of memento mori, that is, a reminder that death is an inevitable part of life, an idea which was often included in art, for example. But the tradition of memento mori is more about remembering that death is never far away, even when we're celebrating life, even still life, which is not the goal of these covers. Instead, we have, what? Remember blooms even when you're suffering? Seems like a weird message. Perhaps these covers are more reminiscent of art inspired by the Day of the Dead. But there's something joyful and playful about those images, unlike the book covers. So please, if you have any ideas about why this trend might have caught on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, feel free to tell me about your own favorite book cover trends down in the comments. Well, thanks for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.